A man stands on a rocky ridge overlooking a valley of thick, black smoke. His sandals covered in white ash. He is watching his world disappear. Most people think the text will rush to provide a silver lining. A quick reminder that God is still in control. Nothing about his physical reality has changed. His stomach is still empty. His city is still dead. But something shifts in his mind. "This I call to mind," he writes, "and therefore I have hope." Memory becomes his weapon. He remembers the alphabet. He remembers the covenant. He remembers Hesed. The Hesed of God is not a rescue from the fire. It is an anchor inside the fire. His hope is not based on a change in circumstance. His hope is based on a change in focus. Babylon can burn the cedar pillars. Babylon can melt the sanctuary gold. Babylon cannot burn the character of Yahweh. The mercies are new every morning, not because the pain is gone, because the sun still rises over the smoking rubble, because the covenant outlasts the empire. He finishes the chapter. He survives the epicenter. He binds his heaviest trauma to the alphabet. And the structure holds the weight. But trauma does not vanish just because you find a moment of clarity. The structure is about to face its final test. We are a species that requires structure to survive our own minds. When a catastrophic loss hits your life, a sudden phone call at 2 a.m, a diagnosis delivered under the buzzing white glare of fluorescent hospital lights, or the collapse of a relationship you built your entire future around, or a clean theological explanation for why the suffering had to happen. They expect a sermon on hope. Your brain physically alters its sequencing. Time stops moving in a straight line. Trauma is not a memory of a painful event. It is a present-tense reliving of the shattering. Every time your mind brushes against the edges of the loss, your nervous system reacts as if the fire is burning right now. The chest tightens. The jaw locks. The lungs refuse to draw a full breath. The psychological weight presses against your ribcage like a physical stone. If you have ever sat on the edge of a mattress in a silent room, terrified that if you finally allow yourself to weep, you might never actually stop. You know exactly what this void feels like. When you watch a casket being lowered into the damp earth, or when you are betrayed by someone who swore an oath to protect you. Theology is often the first casualty. You do not need a lecture on divine sovereignty. You do not need someone quoting Bible verses at your tears. You need a way to keep your heart from stopping. This is why the ancient architecture of Lamentations is not just a poetic curiosity. It is a clinical blueprint for survival. Modern trauma therapy often focuses on helping a person build containers' mental and physical boundaries. But if you look closer at the actual structure of the scroll written in the aftermath of this fire, you start to see something the comfort first reading completely misses. Designed to hold unmanageable emotions so they do not drown the psyche. You cannot process an ocean of grief all at once. The human mind requires a cup. You cannot digest the death of a dream or the violent end of a decade in a single afternoon. You have to break the darkness down into measurable fragments. You give the pain a boundary. You assign it a letter. You breathe through Aleph. You survive Bet. You endure Gimel. The rigid structure gives you permission to feel the absolute worst of the agony, but it also provides a mechanism to step out of it. It forces the chronological clock to start ticking again. It proves to your fracturing mind that the panic attack, no matter how suffocating, actually has an ending. The ancient poet meticulously maintains this architectural lifeline for 4 complete chapters. The alphabet holds the chaos at bay. The grammatical borders remain intact, but there is a 5th chapter in this scroll, and when you unroll the parchment to the final column, the entire structural system suddenly collapses. Look at the final column of the scroll. Chapter 5 has exactly 22 verses. That matches the precise number of letters in the Hebrew language. But the acrostic is gone. Aleph does not begin verse 1. Bet does not begin verse 2. Gimel is entirely missing. The letters are scattered. The Book of Lamentations is not a theological defense of God. It is a container for human agony. The borders are erased. The cage is broken. The poet abandons the architecture. He drops the poetic constraint. He stops trying to meticulously organize the chaos. He simply points at the wreckage. Our inheritance is turned over to strangers. Our drinking water must be bought. Our wood comes at a price. Our skin is hot as an oven. The elders have left the city gate. The joy of our heart has ceased. The grammar fractures. The structure dissolves. The rigid theological container is ripped open. In the ancient Near East, religious texts are designed to resolve. They are designed to logically explain why the gods are angry and exactly how to appease them. They are supposed to end with cosmic order confidently restored. But Lamentations refuses to play by the rules of ancient religious propaganda. The abandoned acrostic is not a literary mistake. It is a psychological message. Some trauma refuses to be categorized. Some grief outlasts the alphabet. You can build the most perfect mental boundaries in the world. And eventually, the sheer weight of reality will crack the limestone walls. The human mind can only hold the tension for so long before the rigid structures of faith have to yield to the raw, unedited reality of the pain. The book does not end with a triumphant worship song. It does not end with a clean, confident victory. It does not even circle back to the beautiful Hesed of chapter 3 to tie a neat theological bow on the tragedy. When you look at this text, you are looking at what happens when the human mind is pushed past the breaking point of trauma. The very last words of Lamentations are a ragged, desperate plea. Restore us to yourself, O Lord, unless you have utterly rejected us and remain exceedingly angry with us. It ends with an ellipsis. It ends with a suspended cord. It ends sitting in the cold soot, waiting for a voice from heaven that has not yet answered. This lack of resolution is not a failure of faith. It is the most vital survival tactic in the ancient text. Because that unresolved silence is exactly what modern religion tries so frantically to hide. If you sit in a modern church and you are actively carrying trauma, you will quickly realize how uncomfortable we are with the ash. We want you to heal quickly. We want the victory narrative. We want the upbeat, three-chord worship song that demands a breakthrough by the second chorus. And we want the well-meaning hand on your shoulder in a brightly lit foyer telling you that everything happens for a reason. We are terrified of the suspended cord. We are terrified of the silence that follows the devastation. So we try to fill it with cheap theological band-aids, while your chest still feels like it is packed with splintered glass. Modern religion demands that you find the moral lesson in your suffering before the service ends. But the Bible does not demand that. The author, sitting in the ashes of everything he loved, was diagnosing something. He was naming a psychological reality. The Bible gives you the Book of Lamentations. When you realize that this broken, unresolved, devastatingly honest scroll was canonized, that it was intentionally preserved by the community and embedded into the very center of the sacred text, it completely reorients what it means to have a relationship with the divine. It means the Holy Spirit inspired a book that accuses God of being a predator lying in wait. It means the architect of Scripture intentionally made permanent room for human anger, human doubt, and human despair. A desperate, angry question hurled at the sky is not a lack of faith. It is the most primal form of trust. You do not scream at an empty room. You only scream at someone if you believe they are actually standing there in the dark with you. You only demand justice if you believe the person listening is capable of providing it. The poet sitting in the ruins of Jerusalem did not abandon his covenant. He dragged his bleeding and fractured mind into the absolute center of the rubble. And he demanded that Yahweh look at what happened. He refused to let God off the hook. If you are in a season where the neat religious formulas feel like insults to your pain, you need to read this scroll. You have permission to stop pretending. You have permission to let the acrostic break that most people do not even realize they are dealing with when their own world collapses. You do not have to tie a neat theological bow on the freshly dug soil of a grave, or the legal paperwork of a broken family, or the chronic illness that is slowly stealing your physical future. You are allowed to sit in the darkness and simply point at the wreckage. Because when you finally stop trying to sanitize your grief for a religious audience, you realize what this ancient architecture is actually doing. A man sat in the ashes of a burned city and he built a cage for his mind out of the alphabet. The reed pen traced Aleph to Tav, and the chronological clock of survival started to tick again. The physical center of the scroll tripled the weight, and the darkest psychological despair finally found a voice. The poet named God as a predator in the dark, and the Holy Scriptures canonized the accusation. A single word of loyal love appeared at ground zero, and the anchor held inside the fire. The perfect acrostic finally fractured in the 5th chapter, and religion was forced to sit in the unresolved silence. An ancient survivor hurled a desperate, unfinished plea at heaven, and it became the most primal form of trust. He did not just sit down and pour out his feelings in random, unchecked wails. He built a structure, same letters, same grief, same God. But maybe the part that stays with me most is the scattered letters at the very end of the scroll. The moment the acrostic breaks, because we spend so much of our lives trying to keep our pain perfectly formatted, we try to keep it neat, presentably, and perfectly bound from Aleph to Tav, so we do not make anyone else uncomfortable. We are terrified of what will happen if we let the grammar of our faith fracture. But this ancient poet knew that eventually, the rigid walls have to give way to the raw, unedited reality of the ash. If you are in a season where the structure of your life has collapsed, and the neat theological answers feel like insults to your pain, do not force a victory song. You have permission to gasp for air. Aka. You have permission to build a temporary wall, just to survive the day. And you have permission to let that wall break when the weight is too heavy to carry. If this opens something deep inside you, subscribe. Leave a comment, even one word helps. Share this with someone who is sitting in their own ashes and needs the permission to grieve. Pray for us as we keep digging into these texts. He engineered a specific, highly rigid architecture designed to hold the absolute chaos of his grief. And may the God who canonized our weeping, the God who never demands a fake hallelujah in the middle of a funeral, sit with you in the silence and hold you in the dark until the mercies finally arrive with the morning. Because when trauma shatters your world, uncontained emotion will destroy you. You need borders. You need a boundary to keep the pain from swallowing you whole. The walls of Jerusalem, massive limestone blocks that stood immovable for 400 years, are being systematically pulled down. To find the answer to how this ancient poet survived the unimaginable, you have to look at the very first word he wrote on the parchment. It is a word that sounds less like a lyric and more like a physical gasp for air. And it sets up a structural masterpiece that most English readers walk right past without ever realizing what they are stepping on. The English translation is far too polite. Lamentations, chapter 1. Verse 1 begins with a solitary observer staring at a ghost town. You read it in your modern Bible and it says, "How lonely sits the city that was full of people." But the text does not actually begin with a clean, measured sentence. It begins with a primal sound. The very first word of the scroll is the Hebrew aka. It is usually translated as how or alas. But aka is not a standard grammatical interrogative. It is a specialized, visceral wail. It is the signature cry of a Middle Eastern funeral dirge. It is the guttural noise, torn from a mourner's throat when they stare at the cold body of someone they love. The prophet Isaiah uses the exact same word when he watches the justice of his society rot away in Isaiah 121. Aka. You can hear the siege engines splintering cedar beams, the rhythmic thud of Babylonian battering rams, the weeping of a starved population being marched eastward in chains. How the faithful city has become a prostitute? Aka is not a question expecting an answer. It is a gasp searching for air. To understand why this gasp is necessary, you have to understand exactly what died in the year 586 BC. In the ancient Near East, Israel holds a very specific, ironclad theology. It is called Zion theology. They believe God lives in the temple. They believe God promised David a king forever. They believe God will always protect his holy mountain. Jerusalem cannot fall. It is a theological impossibility. The entire architecture of their faith is built on absolute permanence. Then the Babylonian war machine arrives. The siege lasts 18 months. The grain silos empty. The water cisterns dry into cracked mud. The skin of the residents turns black from starvation. The massive cedar doors of the temple are hacked to pieces with axes. The sacred bronze pillars are smashed into scrap metal. The presence of God vanishes. The fire in 586 BC was not just a military defeat. It was a theological collapse. Every promise they leaned on is gone. Every structure that gave their life meaning is reduced to white ash. You can hear the survivors weeping in the streets for children who are no longer breathing. You can feel the heat of the burning. The temple is burning. The heat is so intense that the gold of the inner sanctuary is melting into the cracks of the stone pavement, limestone radiating against your face. The cognitive dissonance is deafening, because the prophets are declaring that the God who promised to protect them is the one orchestrating the fire. Babylon did not just dismantle their stone walls. Babylon dismantled their reality. When human beings experience this level of catastrophic trauma, when the theology you were taught completely fails to explain the horror you are experiencing, the mind fractures. You cannot articulate pain this deep. You cannot string together logical paragraphs. The grief is too massive. It threatens to drown you. So, how do you write a poem when your theology has just burned to the ground? You do not start with theology. You start with the alphabet. A man kneels in the cooling ash of a ruined street. He unrolls a blank piece of parchment across his thigh. He dips a reed pen into an inkwell mixed with soot and water. And he begins to draw the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph. He writes one stanza of grief. Then he draws the second letter, Bet. He writes a second stanza. He does not stop until he reaches the 22nd and final letter of his language, Tav. This is the structural secret hiding beneath the English translation of Lamentations. Chapters 1 are San, and 4 are not free-flowing diaries of sadness. The smell of roasted grain mixes with the scent of blood and burning timber. This is not just a historical footnote. They are perfect, rigidly engineered acrostics. Every single stanza in these chapters begins with the successive letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, marching in absolute linguistic order all the way to Tav. 22 letters, 22 stanzas. When you first discover this, it feels almost offensive. Why would someone whose world has just violently ended care about poetic formatting? When you are weeping over starved children and the blackened ruins of the temple, you do not usually care about alphabetical order. People in the middle of a panic attack do not write perfectly measured sonnets. But the author of this scroll understands something profound about the nature of human suffering. When grief is absolute, it feels infinite. It feels like an ocean of black water that will never stop rising, a darkness that has no edges and no bottom. If you just open your mouth and scream into that kind of void, the scream will never end. The pain will swallow your mind entirely. The acrostic structure is not a clever literary trick. It is a psychological retaining wall. In the ancient world, the alphabet represents the totality of human expression. To say something spans from Aleph to Tav is to say it covers everything that can possibly be articulated. By anchoring his unspeakable agony to the letters of the alphabet, the poet is telling, this is ground zero of the greatest psychological and theological catastrophe in the history of ancient Israel. His own fracturing mind that the pain has boundaries. The alphabet has a beginning, and the alphabet has a definitive end. It starts at Aleph, and it stops at Tav. The grief is total, but it is not infinite. He is giving his chaos a cage. You can almost hear the scratching of the reed pen against the leather parchment, fighting to keep the despair from spilling over the margins. When trauma strikes, the human brain loses the ability to sequence events. The past, the present, and the terrifying future all collapse into one suffocating knot. But by binding his weeping to the Aleph Bet, the writer forces time to move forward again. Aleph must be followed by Bet. Bet must yield to Gimel. The structure itself becomes a physical lifeline, a rope he is pulling himself along through the darkest valley of his life. He does this perfectly for chapter 1. He builds the boundary again for chapter 2. But when he reaches chapter 3, the physical and thematic center of the scroll, the pain becomes too heavy for a standard wall. The trauma spikes. And the architecture of the poetry has to radically shift to keep from collapsing under the weight. The architecture of chapter 1 is steady. The architecture of chapter 2 holds the line. But chapter 3 changes the math. When the city fell in 586 BC, the fire did not just consume the buildings. It consumed the covenant. It consumed the identity. When you unroll the parchment to the physical center of the scroll, the structure suddenly triples in intensity. Instead of 22 verses, there are 66. Instead of writing one stanza for the first letter, the poet writes 3. Aleph, Aleph, Aleph. Then he moves to the second letter. Bet, Bet, Bet. He strikes the exact same grammatical note 3 times before allowing himself to move forward. The rhythm is no longer a steady walk through the ruins. It is the repetitive, suffocating strike of an iron hammer against a bronze anvil. It is the heavy, black soot ink pooling on the page as the reed pen traces the same letter over and over again. It is the feeling of a man trapped in a pitch-black room, running his bleeding hands along the same cold stone wall, desperately searching for a door that does not exist. The lungs cannot draw enough oxygen. The grief is compounding. The structure is bearing triple the weight because the trauma has reached its absolute peak. Chapter 3 is not just a longer poem. It is the epicenter of a shattered mind. If watching this ancient architecture of trauma unfold is putting a voice to something heavy you have been carrying, you are exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe. Because every week, we go deeper. It consumed the promises. Everything the people built their reality on was suddenly gone, replaced by rubble and a deafening silence from heaven. Into these ancient texts than you knew was possible. So the poet strikes the anvil again. Gimel, 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 Dalet, Dalet, Dalet. He plunges into the darkest theological despair in the entire Bible. The author stops talking about the Babylonians. He stops blaming the siege engines, or the cracked cisterns, or the famine. He stops looking at the ash. He points a trembling finger directly at the sky. He has driven me into darkness. The poet writes, He has walled me in so I cannot escape. He has made my chains heavy. Even when I cry out, He shuts out my prayer. This is the terrifying, unfiltered honesty of biblical lament. The author does not sanitize his pain for a religious audience. He does not cushion his words to protect God's reputation. He accuses God of being a bear lying in wait, a predator tearing his flesh to pieces, an archer using him for target practice. The covenant feels dead. The promises feel like cruel jokes. The darkness is absolute. And the poet is completely consumed by the bitterness in his own throat. Every human being who has survived a catastrophe knows exactly where this man is standing. This is the moment when the mind gives up. And it is right here, at the absolute bottom of the psychological abyss. In the exact center of the tripled acrostic that the pivot arrives, he reaches the 8th letter of the alphabet. At a DZ, most people assume that when the Bible deals with grief of this magnitude, it offers immediate comfort. The reed pen pauses. The soot water drips onto the leather. He draws the letter Het 3 times. Het, et examp, Het. And right here, in the middle of the rubble, the tone shifts. It is Lamentations chapter 3, verse 21. It is the most famous verse in the entire scroll. You know it. It is printed on greeting cards. It is stitched into wall hangings. It is sung in modern worship. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. But read it in the ash. The word translated as steadfast love is the Hebrew hesed. It does not mean sentimental affection. It is a massive, muscular word. It means loyal love. It means covenant keeping. It is a fiercely stubborn commitment that refuses to let go. even when the contract is broken. It appears nearly 250 times in the Old Testament, and it is the bedrock of Israel's entire relationship with Yahweh. It is a love based on an oath. It is the exact word God uses to define himself to Moses on Mount Sinai, abounding in hesed. Look at where the poet places this word. He does not place it in a restored city. He places it in the dirt. The bodies are still in the streets. The temple is still melted gold and shattered cedar. The Babylonian soldiers are still marching his friends into exile.